The early 20th century Russian emigre actor-director Michael Chekhov, who was a pupil of Stanislavski's at Moscow Theatre, came to the UK to found the acting course at Dartington College of Art, and then latterly went to Hollywood and worked with Marilyn Monroe, I think. Did some acting himself in films there. He developed a number of techniques, which are perhaps not as well known as they might be, actually. His mentor Stanislavski is probably better known with it. But one of Chekhov's techniques, which I think has got some mileage in it, and could be, I think, reinvigorated, is his idea of the psychological gesture, or the PG, it's called in acting terms. The psychological gesture is an actor training exercise in which the character in a scene, and this is naturalistic, character-based acting we're talking about, the character in the scene would identify perhaps some sort of emotion that's in the scene, or some kind of objective that the character has to gain, or perhaps some identifiable personality trait within the character itself, and would find a way of associating a particular physical gesture with that moment in the scene. So it might be the gesture of banging a fist on the table, something like that, if it's either an angry character or an angry scene or something like that. Or it might be, sort of holding oneself in an embrace, or protecting one's face in a defensive movement. So there's a particular gesture which the actor would find with helping the director, hopefully. And they would physically do this. They would actually bang the table, or actually caress, embrace themselves or something, to really get that sense, or to get a felt sense of what that gesture is like. And then they would work towards the scene, saying the words, going through the actions, possibly initially actually still doing that gesture, still engaging in it whilst you're saying the lines. But eventually you would let the gesture slowly fall away, so there wasn't an actual physical fist being slammed into a tabletop, or no arms were being curled protectively around the face. But the idea is that at some level that gesture is still taking place psychologically, and that gesture, that sort of psychological gesture, kind of provides the motivation, or provides the cognitive structure for the delivery of the lines and the other sort of movements in the scene. That's sort of how the psychological gesture works. The reason why I think it might be worth revisiting is because of the developments in embodied cognition and cognitive linguistics, which are extremely important right now, I think. What those ideas suggest is that psychological gestures, in a sense, aren't confined to this particular practice that Michael Chekhov set up, but in a way we're all making psychological gestures all the time, and sometimes those leak out into our physicality in a very overt way. Sometimes they apparently don't leak out at all, maybe I'll come to that, and sometimes perhaps they leak out in a very, very small way. I can't stop myself giving an example. So when I'm saying in a very small way, I can feel myself doing this with my hands, as if I'm holding a little tiny screwdriver and making minute adjustments to this way in which these things are leaking out. There's a kind of in embodied cognition terms, the structure of my understanding, perhaps an unconscious understanding of this term, a small way, is the structure of that is understood in terms of something small, something physically small. So that act of embodied cognition is leaking out into my actual embodiment. So I am sort of manipulating this tiny little screwdriver and doing something with it. Just on that, what I'm noticing here, of course, is that whilst I'm manipulating this tiny little screwdriver and modifying the small way in which these things are leaking out. That action isn't confined simply to my fingertips. I can feel my shoulders hunching, I can feel my breathing changing, I can feel the balance on the soles of my feet different. I can feel the muscles at the back of my neck slightly more tense than they were. I can feel my brow sort of wrinkling. In other words, there's not just, that gesture isn't confined to the minutiae of the carrying out of the action. My whole body seems to be composing itself around the necessities of that gesture. And I think this is also part of what Chekhov was talking about, or one of the necessary implications of what he was talking about. So outside of acting and directing circles, outside of the work of Michael Chekhov, this embodied cognition seems to demonstrate that psychological gestures are with us all the time, and they're leaking out every time we talk about something being small, every time we grasp an idea, every time we are a little vague about it, as if I'm trying to waft away the clouds of uncertainty, and so on. So I suppose what I'm saying here, where this is going, is that this work, Michael Chekhov's idea of psychological gesture, seems to have required academic support in the field of cognitive linguistics. And what it suggests is that psychological gestures, which aren't restricted only to the hands, but which organise the proprioception of the whole body, probably, are happening to us all of the time. So presumably this, I'm just wondering what that would be like if it was visible. So every thought that's passing through my mind is sort of rippling the surface of my proprioception. It's very likely the case. I mean, certainly tiny little movements like the saccading of the eyes and micro modifications in breathing patterns do happen all the time with changes in perception and cognition. So maybe the psychological gesture of Michael Chekhov isn't about simply formulating gestures. It can't be that because they happen all the time. It might be partially about bringing that process to consciousness, undoubtedly, and having conscious control over it. But it's probably also, at least partially, about limiting, focusing, and amplifying certain gestures, so that the shimmering surface of micro gestures happening at the on the surface of proprioception is reined in, trained, and focused, and ultimately used as a kind of communicative tool. My dogs are having a great time with Bruno, which is one of their friends. Psychological gestures of their tails are very, very evident.